Welcome, everyone. I'm Nicole Potter, and just to make sure that you are in the right place, this is the First Steps Workshop. It's a scene journey preview experience that is to help guide you to reconnect with yourself, reconnect with God, and begin learning to walk it out together. I'm so glad that you're here. If you would let me know you are here and where you're from in the comments, I would love it. And so that I stay on track and I don't keep you here forever, I want you to be able to respond and connect in the comments. I personally am not in the comments today. I have someone helping me, but I will go back and I will read all the comments. Okay. Before we begin, I want you to recognize something important. If you are here today, you have already made a choice that many women haven't made. You didn't just become aware that something needs to change. You made the choice to do something about it. And I say that with compassion, not judgment, because I know what it feels like to know something is off, but not really know what to do with that feeling. For years, I knew something was different. I loved God. I was showing up. I was doing the things I thought I was supposed to do. But underneath everything, there was a quiet question. Where did I go? Why don't I feel like myself anymore? Who am I? Where do I go from here? And I think so many females can relate to that. Because most women don't suddenly lose themselves overnight. Life slowly adds layers, responsibilities, expectations, roles, disappointments. We have transitions, we have loss, we take care of others, and we're trying to be what everyone needs us to be. And somewhere along the way, we stop checking in with ourselves. And to be honest, some of us may never have, because I was one of those. We stopped asking, what do I need? What is God speaking to me? Or we're trying to figure it out. We could be asking, who am I becoming? Or where am I at all? So today is a space for you to pause, a space to reflect, a space to listen, not to judge yourself, not to fix yourself, and not to become someone else, but to begin reconnecting with the woman that God created you to be before life told you who you had to be. Before we continue, I want you to take a moment. If you have a journal nearby, grab it, or a scrap piece of paper or something. If you've been with me before, you know that we aren't just going to be talked to. This is going to be a two-way. I am here and you will be responding in your notebook or in the comments as you feel comfortable. Sometimes the first step is simply acknowledging that I'm ready to create space. So I want to start with a question. And up front, there is no right or wrong answer. Just allow yourself to reflect. Who were you before life required so much from you? Who were you before you had to carry so much? Before you had so many roles and different hats? Before you learned what everyone else needed from you? I just want you to hold that question just for a moment. And I want you to write down anything that may come up. Why this conversation matters. I want to also acknowledge something important. Not every woman listening today is in the same place. Some women are here because they feel like they lost parts of themselves along the way. They know they've changed. They don't recognize the woman that they have become. And they're asking, where did I go? How do I find my way back? But there are also women here who may say, I actually do know myself. I've grown. I've spent time with God. I know there is something He has placed inside me. And maybe you're stepping into a new season. Maybe you're saying yes to something God is calling you toward. And maybe you're moving forward in faith. But you're feeling yourself asking, why isn't it working the way that I thought it would? Or why is it taking longer than I thought? And why does this feel harder than I expected? Or why do I feel like I'm pushing so hard? And a question I had to ask myself recently, am I building my life or my business or whatever it is that you're working on based on who you were called to be by God and not based by somebody else's expectations or how you think it should be done? Because I want you to know this journey is for you too. Because sometimes the invitation is not that you need to find yourself. Sometimes the invitation is to make sure you are building from the woman God created you to be. Because we can know our gifts, we can know our callings, we can know the direction God is leading us, we can have the vision. And we still need to come back to the foundation of who we are, because it starts there. Because what God calls us to do should flow from who He created us to be, not from pressure, not from proving, not from trying to become someone we think we need to be. So I want you to think about where you are today. And I want to ask you, which one feels more like you right now? One, I feel like I'm finding my way back to myself. Or two, I know God is leading me somewhere, but I want to make sure I'm building from the right place. And if you would, you can simply type 1 or 2 in the comments. When I started this journey, God got my attention in a way that I didn't expect. He invited me to come away with Him. And at first that sounds beautiful. Because He does. He calls us to come away with Him. But honestly, my first thought was, God, that sounds nice, but who has the time for that? Because life was busy. There were people who needed me. There were responsibilities. There were things that needed to be done. But what God showed me was that coming away with Him didn't mean taking a vacation from my life. It meant learning how to connect with Him in my everyday life. He taught me how to notice Him, how to listen, how to create moments of connection in the middle of ordinary days, full days. And over time, He began showing me who I was underneath everything life had landed on top of me. Underneath the wounds, underneath the pressure, underneath the hurt, underneath the beliefs, underneath the expectations, underneath the patterns, underneath the responsibilities. And what I discovered was something I never expected. I realized I had no idea who I was. People kept telling me just to be who I was. I had no idea who she was. I had become a chameleon throughout my life, and adapted based on what other people needed me to be. It was just something that I had learned to do. I wasn't being fake. I just knew what people needed from me. I knew what I was supposed to do, but I really didn't know what I wanted, what brought me joy, what God had placed inside of me, who He created me to be, and who I was becoming. And it reminds me of the movie of Runaway Bride with Julia Roberts, where at the end she was testing out 27 different kinds of eggs because she had adapted to what way she liked food based on who she was with. And she realized that she liked, I don't even remember what they're called, Benedict? Eggs Benedict. I had no idea who I was. I knew at the core of me that I was a good person, whether my beliefs or experiences around me matched that in the moment. And it was through this journey that I took with God that He revealed to me who I was based on who He created me to be. So over the last several years, God has shown me who He is and who I am. But most importantly, He has shown me who we are together. And this is something He and I have called being independently dependent. For a long time, I thought dependence on God meant I needed to lose myself, die to self as we know it, and that I needed to become less of me. But what God showed me was the opposite. The scripture is true, and I'm not throwing it out, so I don't want people to come at me. But He created me intentionally. He created my personality, my gifts, my passions, my desires, my voice, my experiences, my story. And dependence on Him does not erase who I am. It reveals who He created me to be. Being independently dependent means I am fully me, but I was never created to do life apart from Him. And neither were you. I can trust myself because I'm learning to trust Him. I can listen to my heart because I'm learning to listen to His voice. And I can step into purpose because I know my foundation and my heart posture is connected to Him. And through this journey, God taught me how to follow the breadcrumbs of life. Those small moments, those gentle invitations, those things that He's been highlighting, those places where He was saying, look here, pay attention. I want to meet you here. And that is what brings us here today. I want to walk you through the scene journey that over the last 6 years as a process that God and I have walked through. And I want to start with S, because seen is an acronym. S stands for self-awareness, which is the first step home. That's learning to see, not judge, not criticize, not immediately try to fix, ladies, but simply pay attention and notice, because we cannot reconnect with something we never take time to notice. Many women believe they're lost. But if I could, I'd like to offer you a different perspective. Maybe you're not lost. Maybe you have simply been carrying so much that you haven't had space to hear yourself anymore. Maybe life has been loud. Maybe the needs around you have been loud. And maybe the expectations have also been loud. Maybe the responsibilities have been loud. And somewhere along the way, your voice, your needs, your thoughts, your desires, and your ability to hear have become quiet. You have been showing up, caring, serving, supporting, giving, making decisions, being what others needed you to be, and you stopped asking, what is happening inside me? What am I feeling? What do I need? What is God showing me here in this moment? But I also want to speak to the woman who says, I don't feel lost. Maybe you've actually done a lot of work on yourself. Maybe you have spent time learning who you are. Maybe you know your gifts. Maybe you know your passions. And just maybe you know God is calling you into something more. But you still sense something is off. Maybe you're stepping into a new season. Maybe you're building something. Maybe you're serving. And maybe you are saying yes by faith. But you're wondering, why does this feel so hard? Why am I struggling to move forward? Why does this feel like I'm forcing something? And sometimes the invitation is not that you need more information. Oh my gosh, we have so many ways to get information between Google and AI and books and people around us. And sometimes the invitation is to slow down and reconnect with the foundation. Because we can build something good from a place that is still carrying old beliefs. We can pursue purpose while still trying to prove our worth. We can follow God while still building from an identity shaped by expectations. And God may be inviting you and I to come back and ask, am I living or building from who God created me to be? And I want you to take a moment and reflect here. You can write it down. Wherever you are today, I want you to ask yourself, and I can feel some emotion in this as I go to ask the question. And many may not know the answer, and that is okay. Wherever you are today is okay. But what part of yourself feels the quietest right now? Maybe it's your joy, your confidence, your creativity, your dreams, your voice. Maybe it's your ability to trust yourself and what God is showing you. That has been the biggest struggle for me. Maybe it's your ability to receive. When you're used to being a giver, this one could be a really hard one, which could also be connected back to your identity and worthiness and whether you deserve it. Maybe it's your ability to rest. Maybe you learned that it's a reward. Maybe you learned that you just don't rest. There's always something to be due. But God rested. What part of you feels like it has been waiting to be seen? Or maybe God is asking you to be seen and you're trying to remain in hiding. That was me too. I want you to take a moment to think about that. Jot down any notes with compassion, not judgment or analysis or the need to fix. I know we're problem solvers, but today we're just, in this moment, we're bringing awareness to what we may have been stuffing. And now I want to ask you, what have you been carrying that no one else sees? And maybe you wouldn't even tell anyone. Because so often we're carrying things silently, whether they're responsibilities, expectations, emotions, questions, dreams we have put aside, or maybe thought would never happen, things we've never processed, hurts, wounds, things we thought we needed to push through. And then I have one more for you. Where do I feel like I'm simply going through the motions, living on autopilot? Maybe you go through your day and you don't even remember what you did. Maybe everything looks fine on the outside. Maybe people see you showing up, accomplishing things. But inside, you know there's a deeper invitation, a desire to feel present again. You're feeling restless. You have a desire to feel connected, a desire to know, who am I? Why am I here? And I want you to hear this. Awareness is not about finding something wrong with you. And that's why so many times we hide away from it. Society, the church, wherever it is, we look at ourselves through a magnifying glass of what's wrong with me and how do I fix it. Awareness is an invitation. It is God gently saying, let's look here together. And next, we have E. The second step in the journey is explore the root. And this is where we begin to understand our story, not to stay stuck here, not to blame, not to spend our lives looking backwards or outwards, but to understand, because when we understand our story, we can stop judging ourselves for the ways we learned to survive. Every woman has a story. Every one of you has a season or life experience or circumstances that have shaped you. Every woman has experienced that influence on how she sees herself now, how she relates to others, and sometimes even how she approaches her purpose or feels that she doesn't have one. Maybe somewhere along the way you learned that I need to be the strong one. I need to be the happy one. I need to be adaptable. I need to be in control. I need to take care of everyone else. I shouldn't need help. I shouldn't make mistakes. I need to prove myself. I need to earn love. And I need to be everything for everyone. And I need to abandon myself and stay small. And these may not actually be conscious thoughts, but some of you may have even said these statements. And those beliefs don't just affect our personal lives. They can follow us into our calling. They can follow us into our relationships. They can follow us into our businesses, our ministries, and our dreams, because sometimes we're not struggling because God didn't call us. He created each and every single one of us for a purpose. But sometimes we're struggling because we're trying to carry what God never asked us to carry. Let me say that again. Some of us are struggling because we're trying to carry what God never asked us to carry. Take a moment. I want you to think about this question. What did I learn I had to become in order to keep going? Maybe you became the responsible one, the helper, the achiever, the one who never needed anything, the one who keeps the peace, the one who holds everything together. Just take a moment to think about it and then write it down. And then I want you to ask this: what season of life changed you the most? Not because we need to stay there, but because understanding helps you move forward. What part of you have you set aside? Is it your dreams, your voice, your creativity, your confidence, your ability to trust yourself, your ability to receive love, your ability to believe that you can hear God clearly? Because this is where compassion begins. Because when we understand why we have become the way we are, we can begin meeting ourselves differently. And that brings us to the next E: extend compassion. Compassion for meeting yourself with God's grace. Compassion is so important, and we rarely give it to ourselves. And I believe this is one of the most important steps, because many of you are carrying a story that you've never learned how to hold with compassion. Just shame and guilt and pressure. We are often much kinder to other people than we are to ourselves. We would encourage a friend. We would remind someone that they are loved. We would tell someone, you're doing the best you could with what you knew at the time. But when it comes to ourselves, we often use a completely different voice. We criticize, we question, we replay, we wonder why we didn't do things differently and why we didn't know better, why we didn't recognize things sooner, why didn't we? But what if God sees you differently than you see yourself? What if God sees the woman who was trying, the woman who was carrying things no one knew about, the woman who was learning, the woman who was growing, the woman who was doing her best with the understanding that she had at the time and the ability to handle it in only the way that she could in the moment, which is messy, imperfect? What if he looks at you with more compassion than you could ever offer yourself? And I want to speak to the woman who's stepping into a new season too. Because sometimes we think compassion is only for the woman who feels broken, stressed out, under pressure. But compassion is also for the woman who's becoming, the woman who is taking steps of faith, the woman who is saying yes to God, the woman who is trying something new, the woman who is wondering, why isn't this happening faster? Why isn't this working the way that I thought it would? And why do I keep hitting these walls? Maybe it was just me. But sometimes we assume the answer is, I need to try harder. I need to do more. I need to figure this out. Why do I keep failing? But sometimes God is inviting us to pause. Sometimes we need to ask the harder questions. Not, again, out of judgment or criticism, but out of love and awareness, to get an understanding with compassion. and ask, am I building from a place of love or a place of proving? Am I moving from who God created me to be or who I learned I needed to be? Because your identity is not found in your productivity. Your worth is not found in your accomplishments. And your calling is not meant to come from striving or performance. I speak about these from personal experiences over the last 6 years of walking with the Lord and working with other women over the last 3 years who have been dealing with the same things. And these roots keep coming up over and over and over again. God isn't asking you and I to become someone else so that he can use us. And that was even a conversation I had with the Lord. He's okay with our honesty. He knows what's real anyway. And I said to him one day, several years ago, so you only want me healed so you can use me too? And he said, I don't care if you ever help anyone. How many would expect that answer from God? His response to me was, I want you healed for you. I want you healed for you and I, so you'll come to me and we can have a relationship that Jesus died for you and I to have. But from that place, who you are will naturally flow out of you. And you'll want to help people because that's who you are. God is inviting you and I to become more fully who he created us to be. For you and I. For you and him. Everything that you want is on the other side of that connection. And it'll just naturally happen. Doesn't mean you'll get it perfect every time. Just saying. But I want you to write down this question. And then I would like you to answer it. You could either do it now or later. What would I say to the younger version of myself who carried these seasons? Let me say that again. What would I say to the younger version of myself who carried those seasons? What would you tell her? Would you tell her she should have known better? Or would you remind her that she was learning? Would you criticize her, judge her, shame her? Or would you offer her the same love and compassion that you would give to somebody else? That God will give you and wants to give you. What would it look like if you offered yourself that same love and grace today? Not an excuse, not avoiding growth, but grace. The same grace God extends to us. If it wasn't for his inexhaustible pursuit of me and convincing me who I am and who he is, I wouldn't be sitting here in front of you today. It was because of his love and his compassion for me that brought me here. Because compassion allows you and I to meet ourselves where we are while trusting God to continue leading us forward. Trusting God in us. And this brings us to the final step. The place where we begin listening for what God is inviting us into. Because N stands for notice God's invitation. Because a lot of what we're dealing with in our life, whether which circles that you run in, whether we've been taught to blame the devil for what's going on and so forth, we have natural consequences and circumstances and things going on in our life based on life. And if we're constantly looking outwards to why it's happening, we are doing ourselves a disservice. We are giving our power over to someone else. And God wants to invite you to begin reconnecting. And that is the end. It's noticing God's invitation. Throughout this process, I've learned that God often speaks through gentle invitations, not always through big moments. To be honest, him and I call it we're following the breadcrumbs. And I don't always know where the breadcrumbs are going, and I am still learning to stop trying to figure it out. He gives me daily manna, just like he did the Israelites. Staying on the step that I'm on instead of 3 months in advance, not trying to figure it out. But sometimes it's also through the quiet stirrings. It could be a question, a desire, a realization, a moment where we recognize there is more. So I want to invite you into this reflection. It's one of the questions that I've asked him on a daily basis, moment by moment as needed. God, what are you inviting me to notice about myself in this ... This season, this moment, this circumstance, this feeling, this opportunity, this conversation. But for right now, I want you to stick with the one question. God, what are you wanting me to notice about myself in this season? And take a moment to just allow whatever naturally comes to the surface. We many times try to force the right answer. I don't want you to strive or to try and pressure yourself for the right answer. We don't want the right church answer, because God speaks to us in everyday ways, and he speaks to us differently based on who we are. I like to use the analogy as he's not going to speak to the same person, that whether they're a hairdresser, a truck driver, a sports player. He's going to use language they're going to understand based on their life experiences and where they live in the world and so forth. And we try to check all the boxes and have it come out like somebody else's. We aren't anybody else. We are ourselves. And God is going to speak to us in everyday ways that is going to make sense to us. Yes, it's going to line up to scripture. Yes, it's going to be within God's character. Okay? But he'll speak to us through our relationships. Okay? Connection grows when we learn to listen, to notice, to pay attention. I could be watching a movie and God will highlight something somebody says, and it will take me off on a complete bunny trail because it was something I needed to hear in that very moment that gave me an aha moment. And I honestly don't even know what the movie was about after that. I could be driving down the highway and I will see a license plate that says something. I could see a billboard. I could be in the middle of the grocery store because I've taken the time to connect to God in everyday ways that I can choose to notice the nudges and the invitations and the thoughts that he's giving me, the circumstances, to simply listen. And do I get it right every day? Of course not. The other day I got soaked in the rain because I didn't listen to the nudge to wait a moment and move to a different spot. I could see the direction, but in my impatience, because people were having a conversation and I may have had to wait a moment and thinking, well, it's a beautiful day, God knew 17 minutes later it was going to be a torrential downpour and I was going to get drenched getting back to my car. Simple things. Could it have been a coincidence? Maybe. But the fact that I kind of heard God chuckling in my ear when I looked out the window and went, oh, shoot. He reminded me of the little nudge that he had given me to wait a moment and change my parking spot. I would have been right outside the door. It's simple things like that we can listen, we can reflect, and we can ask, God, what are you stirring in my heart right now? What do I sense I'm ready to explore more deeply? Again, many of it is blamed on the enemy or the people around us causing us to do this, that, or whatever. God showed whatever comes out of me is a response of what's inside of me that God wants to deal with. Doesn't mean what everybody else does is okay. Everybody else's behavior is about themselves too. And we own it, and it's not ours. God wants to help us from the inside out. He wants it to be about the relationship between yourself and him and what's going on with you. Because once we can tame, heal, quiet the storms within us, the storms outside of us won't sway us. And that's the purpose of what God wants to do in our relationships. And I want to share something personal here. I already have, but most of my biggest healing moments came in places where I wanted to run. The places where I wanted to avoid what was coming up. Some of my biggest healings have actually happened in less than 15 minutes. I didn't need to go relive and rehash and sit in the middle of the pain called life. We drove right through it and I came out healed. But I, for a long time, blamed the enemy for my triggers, for the memories that surfaced, for the things that brought emotions up that I didn't understand and most times weren't timely. And then I realized something with his help. I was asking God to heal my heart. I had been asking him to move in my life. I had been asking him to restore me. And sometimes the very things he brought to the surface were, of course, not there to shame me. They were invitations. Invitations to heal. Invitations to understand. Invitations to allow him into a place I had not fully surrendered. And to be honest, didn't really want to look back at. How many of us have time and are afraid to start looking at what's going on because we feel like we're going to unravel and we need to function? Maybe it's just me. But God has shown me he knows what he's doing. And he taught me, starting over 6 years ago, how to walk throughout my day and walk through this practice with him and keep going. God doesn't want to use us. He wants to restore us. He cares about our hearts. He cares about who we are becoming. He is more interested in our heart than our performance, and we have it backwards. And this is where I want to speak to purpose. Because I know many women are asking, what is my purpose? What am I called to do? Why am I here? Will I ever fulfill the call on my life? And those are beautiful questions. But what if before God reveals the assignment or the how, he's trying to invite you into a deeper relationship that most of us resist? What if he's calling you away from social media? What if he's calling you away from people? What if he's calling you back because your first purpose is to return to your first love. What if your first invitation is learning to live from the place of being deeply loved by God? Because Jesus did tell us the greatest commandment was to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. What if this comes first? What if we've been pouring out to everyone around us and we've been so empty we couldn't pour in or receive ourselves? What if everything else flows from that love relationship? Many of you heard me say before, there are two relationships in this world we cannot get away from, even though many of us have spent years avoiding one or both. It's our relationship with God and our relationship with ourselves. And again, the goal is not independence from God. The goal is not losing ourselves in God. The goal is becoming independently dependent, fully who He created us to be, fully connected to Him, and flowing and living our life from there. Because when we begin from that place, when we know we are loved and we reconnect back to the love print that God has placed inside us that we've been chasing since the beginning of time, when we understand ourselves, when we stop building from pressure and start building from connection, everything changes. Everything will begin to flow. Your purpose, your relationship, your gifts, your service. The way you show up in the world gives permission for others to show up in the world as He created them to be too. I have another thought I would like you to entertain. What if taking care of yourself actually isn't selfish? This is something the Lord said to me somewhere in the last 3 months, honestly. What if taking care of yourself is actually honoring and stewarding the woman that God created you to be? What if learning to listen to yourself, understand yourself, and care for yourself is not taking away from your calling and who He created you to be, but preparing you to walk fully in it? Because home was never just a physical location. Home is a belonging. Home is being known. Home is being loved. And maybe this is the first step of you coming home to God, coming home to yourself, and coming home to the woman that He created you to be. Before we move into the next part, I want you to write one sentence. Just one. God, I sense you may be inviting me to. And then just notice. Yes. Notice what comes up. Not what you think should come up. Not what sounds spiritual, but what is actually stirring in you. This is what happens when you begin noticing. But most women need guidance, space, and a process to continue walking this out, because awareness is powerful. Not a bunch of head knowledge. It's that moment when you pause and realize something's changed in me. I don't feel like myself anymore. Where am I in my own life? I know there is something God is inviting me into. I want to understand my story. I want to hear him more clearly. And that moment matters. That moment is where God begins with you. But sometimes we stop there. Not because we don't want to change, not because we don't love God, but because we are not willing to stop, to slow down. We do not slow down long enough to understand ourselves. We beat ourselves up, we push ourselves through, but we don't know how to look beneath the surface without judging what we find. We don't know how to reconnect with the parts of ourselves that we've ignored, hidden, or set aside, or cut off. And sometimes, when we are stepping into a new season, we don't realize that the season we're struggling, the reason we're struggling is because God is inviting us to build from a deeper foundation. Because sometimes we ask, God, what is my next step? God, what is my purpose? God, where are you taking me? And again, those are beautiful questions. But sometimes God is lovingly asking us, before we talk about where you're going, can we talk about who you are? Can we talk about what motive you are building from? Can we talk about the woman who's carrying the calling? Some of us aren't walking out our calling because we haven't stopped long enough to allow God to prepare and develop and to grow us into someone who can carry it. So God, in his lovingness, withholds so it doesn't crush us. Because the goal is not just discovering what you're called to do. The goal is becoming rooted in who you are, in him, with him, while you walk it out. Because your calling was never meant to come from exhaustion, striving, performance. Your purpose was never meant to come from proving. Your impact was never meant to come from abandoning yourself to serve others. And that is why I created the Scene Journey. Not because something is wrong with you or I, not because you need to be fixed, and definitely not because you're behind, but because sometimes we need intentional space. We need guidance. We need a process. We need someone to walk alongside us as we learn to see ourselves and understand our story and extend the compassion towards ourselves and notice where God is inviting us next. Someone who has walked this path before us. And the Scene Journey is a 28-day experience designed to help you reconnect to yourself and God. Understand your story with compassion and notice where he's inviting you next. It's the journey that I've walked through and I continue to walk through and I continue to use on a daily basis, no matter what I'm facing, no matter when I feel stuck. It's the journey that I walk through, the process God used to help me begin seeing beneath the surface, to understand why I did the things I did, to recognize the patterns I carried, to bring compassion to the parts of myself I had judged and criticized and shamed and punished and abandoned, and to learn how to move forward from a place of connection instead of pressure, in full alignment with him. And inside the journey, we continue walking through the Scene method. Again, S, self-awareness, learning to notice where you are, not judging, not criticizing, simply awareness. E was exploring the root, understanding your story, looking at your experiences, your beliefs, your patterns, and the seasons that shaped you. Not to stay stuck in the past or dig through it, but to understand how God is inviting healing and growth and what is running your life today, and learning to extend compassion, to meet yourself with the same grace and compassion that God already offers you, because you cannot build a healthy future while constantly fighting yourself. And notice God's invitation, learning to listen, learning to recognize his voice, learning to pay attention to the ways he's guiding you in your everyday life, the way he talks to you personally. So this journey is for the woman who is in transition, the woman who loves God but no longer recognizes herself or has never recognized who she was. The woman who knows something isn't right. The woman who feels there's more but just doesn't know where to begin. The woman who is stepping into a new season and wants to make sure she's building from alignment. The woman who is ready to stop living from who life required her to be and begin reconnecting with who God created her to be. So before we close, I want you to take one more breath. If you haven't taken a breath, I would like you to take a breath. And just pause for a moment. Because today, for the last hour, it wasn't about getting all the answers. It was simply about seeing something that you haven't seen before. Maybe you recognized yourself in something that I shared. Maybe you realized you've been carrying more than you thought. Or maybe you noticed that you've been moving through life on autopilot, and you may not even been aware that a lot of these things were going on underneath the surface, but it answers why you're feeling the way you're feeling. Or maybe you simply had that quiet thought, something in me is ready for something different. And if that's you, I want you to know this. You don't have to figure it all out today. I give you permission. You don't have to know exactly where this journey is going. And you certainly don't have to become someone else to begin. The good news is you can start right where you are. Because becoming home to yourself isn't about going backwards. It's about becoming willing to notice who you are now, what you've been carrying, and what has changed. And what God may be inviting you into from here. And that's why I don't want to tell you what your next step should be. Crazy, right? We have so many people telling us what we should do. But part of what I do to help women is to help you discover what that is for you. But if you know there's more, but you don't know what your next step should be, I have created a simple self-check called Where Are You on Your Scene Journey? It's designed to help you pause, honestly. Consider where you are right now and identify the next step that may fit the season that you're in or the season that you're moving into. There are no right or wrong answers. It's not a test. It's not a diagnosis. It's simply a way to notice where you are. And when you're finished, you'll be guided towards the next step that makes sense for you. Maybe you're just beginning to wonder what God is showing you. If that's where you are, finding your next steps with God is a free resource that I have to help you pause, bring what's ever happening to God, and begin gaining some clarity around what may be next. And you know what? Everyone who has registered today, I'm going to send you that free copy. That's my gift for you, for taking a moment today to pause and to show up. For those of you who've registered, I have your email address. I will send that out to you after the workshop is over. But maybe you do know that you want something to change. but you keep finding yourself in the same place, then I have what's keeping me stuck.